everybody, and welcome to Life is a Gamble. This is episode number 10, and my guest today is Ed Miller. And Ed Miller was a frequent guest on Gambling with an Edge, mainly back then writing about poker, but he has shifted over into world and has a new book out called Interception that he wrote with Matt Davidow, who also was his co-author, The Logic of Sports Betting, which is sort of a must-read by anybody getting involved in sports betting. So, Ed, welcome to.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me, Richard.
Cool. I want to talk about the new book, Interception, but before we get into that, can we talk about your shift from poker and how that came about?
Sure. Yeah. So I started my kind of gambling journey definitely in poker. I started with the flashing online poker, Paradise Poker, come play Limit Hold'em stuff, from, I don't know, 20 years ago now, over 20 years. And so I ended up moving to Vegas just to play poker for a living. I did that for a while. I got burnt out on playing poker all the time, so that's how I got into writing. Um, and then in like 2015, so I was basically mostly poker for my gambling stuff for the first, I don't know, 10 plus years. But like right after the UIEGA got passed, which was that federal law that kind of made there was a specific carve out for fantasy sports. I don't know if people know the history of this, but and almost immediately, I want to say like within the year, someone launched the first daily fantasy site called like Fantasy Sports Live or something. And I took a look at it and I was like, this is really clever, like especially legally, you know. But my kind of critique of it was this is not a very good gambling game because the skill gap, whatever you want to call it, is too great. Like it's just if you're smart, the casual player is just gonna get destroyed at this. Was my take. I was like this is that I love this game, but anyone who doesn't like play games for a living is gonna just get crushed. So I was like, I don't really think this is going anywhere. And then like $500 million of VC investment later, I mean, that was my take. My take was FanDuel and DraftKings were creations of the investment, vehicle, right? Like I don't ever really, I don't think my take was wrong. I think my take was right that the skill gap is kind of too big for those daily fantasy games. But it just, that effect got overwhelmed by the enormous investment, that those companies were.
I'm kind of amazed they're still going on. I mean, I haven't looked at them in a while because we can't get them here in Nevada, right?
Right.
So, did they lower the rake or something? How
No,
are
the daily fantasy, and I'm not an expert on this. I don't want to like if I say something that's slightly wrong, I mean I'll hear about it probably, whatever,
Right.
mea culpa in advance. But to my knowledge, the daily fantasy parts of those businesses are basically stagnant. And it's essentially, there's not much growth there, and they offer it, and people play it, but it's on its own, it's not much of a business in a sports book.
Yeah, that makes sense. Much in the way that like racetracks just want to have casinos now. The horse racing is dying, but
and that I don't think that was the original idea. I think the original idea was that the daily fantasy game would have legs and growth, and my take was no, this is not a game that's self-sustainable for several reasons. But anyway, I kind of threw in the towel on that take. Like I kind of clung to that take a little too long, really. I mean, I was too stubborn with that take. This is a bad game. This is gonna, meanwhile I watched, all the investment money pour in, and I was like, well, I'm being dumb here. I should just go win the money.
Right, yeah.
I was like, why am I stubbornly clinging to this take that this is a bad game? Why don't I just win the money? So, once I had that thought, that's what I did, basically. So I did. So I ramped up a little. I basically built a little kind of software suite today they would call them optimizers, right? There are optimizers now that are available on the web, but I kind of built my own optimizer before the public optimizers were a thing, and created a bunch of daily fantasy lineups every day, and so that was my entry to the sports stuff was that with me saying stop being dumb and just go win the money. Yeah. So yep, and that's how I got started.
So now you came up with this crazy idea to develop in-game models and sell them to the sports books, right?
Right.
And
So that wasn't my. So what happened was, Matt, who's my co-author and partner in all of this. I met Matt originally like 20 years ago playing poker in Vegas, right? So, but then I just would see him around town here and there, but I didn't really talk gambling much with him. And then we both got recruited to consult on a fantasy sports project independently, and we kind of traded notes a little bit, and we realized we were both had exactly the same idea as far as winning the daily fantasy money, except I went about it with I had built I showed him my optimizer stuff that I built, and then he was kind of doing things by hand. He had a different method, but it was our strategy for like the game strategy was very similar, right? That we come to independent, and so yeah, and I think he was like, hey, you know, I like the software skills that, that Ed has. So yeah, so he was like, well, why don't we work together? And then that was his project that he wanted to work on was building the next generation of in-game models. So starting with football. So that was how we started with that. So he was like, hey, let's build a in-game model for football, and I said, are you sure? He's like, trust me. and then yeah, so that's how that started. And yeah, we built it, and it, I thought was remarkably good. I was very surprised by how well it came out. And yeah, and then we just kind of started doing that for all the major American sports. And by 2018, we had more or less an entire suite of in-game models.
yeah, it just seems an enormous undertaking to try to do that for all the major sports. I
I mean,
mean,
football's the hardest one. Football is very tricky because the scoring is weird, and it has to do with the way the drives work and the way all the strategy changes in reaction to the weird scoring at the ends of games, and all that stuff. Like, are they going to go for it on fourth down? Are they going to kick a field goal? Are they going to go for two? Are they going to all that weird stuff that happens makes football very tricky. And just the play calling changes, right? The play calling changes fairly dramatically in the fourth quarters, and just to try to get all that strategic weirdness kind of correct in a model is and then NFL is different from college, right? In college they play substantially different in many of those situations. The whole offenses work differently in college. I mean, it's so football is the hardest for sure. I mean, basketball is our basketball model is markedly simpler, I would say.
okay, well, so this really kind of leads us directly into the new book, Interception. I want to say for the listeners who haven't read the first book, the logic of sports betting really sort of was a basic primer on how bookmakers work, how lines work, the difference between a market maker and a retail book. But the new book is more about, I guess I would say, more about how the inner workings work and how to get away with with being a professional bettor, sort of some tips and tricks. And the two things really stuck out to me about this book. Number one, it just seems like there is a lot of incompetence in this business, like a lot of crazy things going on in these multi-billion-dollar companies. For example, you give an example of how the people in charge of football, there are a bunch of these guys in the UK where they don't have college football, so they were just using their pro football model on college and this kind of thing.
Right. So okay. Well, so I'll kind of so the way I would say it is I would say the logic of sports betting is kind of about how sports betting markets work. So it's kind of an introduction to this is how the sports betting market works, and if you see a lines minus, 9.5 line, and you think like understanding who you're betting against when you're betting into that line on Sunday morning, you're not just people had this idea, oh, you're betting against Vinny with a cigar who's got his power ratings. No, 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 you're not. You're betting into a market of that is basically price discovered by some extremely smart people who do this, full time. So that was kind of the point of logic of sports betting, was an introduction to that concept and how those markets work. So this book, yeah, this book is more about how we call them modern sports books in the book, and we don't kind of name brand names, but you can figure out roughly
Yeah.
who we're talking about. And uh, they go far, far beyond the markets, the betting options that have markets associated with them. It's not just, Lions minus 9.5. It's every single possible point spread from plus 17.5 to minus 27.5 they have you can bet on, right? And they have a price for each one. And the key idea is that, in in-play markets, all the in-play stuff and all the different props and all the different single game parlays, and I mean these menus, and the way they get those is there's no market behind that. There isn't, a bunch of smart people that are banging those prices into place. Those prices are created by companies, of which we founded one, that use models to create those pricing. So when you're betting into, Lions minus 9.5, on Sunday morning, you're basically saying to all the smartest football bettors in the world, I think you're wrong. If you bet into even an in-game market, you're just saying, Ed Miller, I think you're a clown. And that could entirely be true. And so the book kind of starts there and makes that distinction. It says, understand what goes into the numbers you bet. So you use the word incompetence. I would not use the word incompetence. I think people are trying hard. What I would say is I think they're over-promising, right? I think the sports betting industry is over-promising the amount of product they can offer, right? Product in the vernacular of this industry is just all the different betting options, right? So every time they want to add a new thing you can bet on, someone has to make a price on that, right? There has to, you know,
And
someone
that
has
is
to
Vinny
price
with
it.
the cigar.
And yeah, it is. It's Ed, and I don't smoke cigars much,
Well,
but
you were
but
doing
yeah,
in game, but if you're betting, somebody for this many passing yards, you know,
that would be someone else with a cigar. Yeah, that's right.
yeah,
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 yeah, yeah.
exactly.
Well, our company has some of those options too, and we're expanding. But
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Right. You're betting into somebody's one company. It's usually one company, I would say, maintaining some kind of model or infrastructure, and essentially their opinion is what you're betting into, which is very different from betting into a market. Yeah.
Is there a way to know how many providers are there? Oh, that's the other thing that struck me was how this is all pieced together with spit and chewing gum. Like
Yeah.
one person, one person, doing the main lines, and a different company doing the in game, and a
Yes.
different company handling all the customers. And
Yep.
is there a way to know which books are using which companies? Is
There
that
is, but you
public
got to do
information?
research. You can ask on Twitter. So there's sort of a small industry uh, uh niche on Twitter where the people who know about this stuff sort of lurk, and they'll answer questions, and if you want to know, and you can research it. None of it's a secret. It's also generally not advertised, if that makes
Right.
sense, right? Like it's
Sure.
so these relationships are all available if you ask around. You go to conferences or you go on Twitter and you kind of ask, hey, who does the golf for so and so, right? Like you could ask
Yeah.
that question and there's an answer. There's such and such company. And it's funny because sometimes the answer is, well, such and such company does the the front end does the, like there's a golf in-play product, for instance, that I really am a fan of, which is kind of why I'm calling it out, because this is trying to be positive and say you did a good job. So there's a golf product, an in-play product, and there's like a little picture of the golf course, right? And you can like click on any golfer, and it kind of shows you where on the course they are, and you can bet on them, in play during the tournament. And I think it's a pretty slick product. But even that, it's like a collaboration effort between one company that is like in charge of the raw data, like all the shot data in real time, a different company that's in charge of the pricing the shot data, right? This is my understanding of how this product works. And maybe some of these, again, I don't
Yeah.
want to get somebody saying, hey, you're wrong. Well, okay, maybe I'm wrong. And then maybe I think there might even be a third company that's in charge of the graphics,
Oh,
the web
wow. Yeah.
graphics, right? Or I think it might be the data and the web graphics might be the same company, and then the pricing might be a different firm. Anyway, the point is, yes, all this stuff is generally collaboration between distinct entities, and then that golf product is offered by a sports book, which is definitely a distinct entity from the entities that created the product. So yeah,
Yeah.
yep,
So the other thing that struck me is like I know very little about sports betting. I'm just starting to stick my toes in a little
yep,
bit. Um, I'm getting the impression that there are very, very few originators. Like, I see a lot of talk
correct,
by
yes,
people who are making money with this top down or scalping or various things that do not require, building models. So,
right,
so is that impression correct that there are very
correct. You're
few?
you're definitely correct. Yes, yeah. There are
Okay.
very few people who are actually like betting into the market stuff, like what I was saying, like Saturday morning college football day, who are placing a ton of bets into the full on betting market on the point spreads and the totals, and who are doing that for a profit. There's a very small,
Huh.
very small.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, but that is very encouraging then, I would think, for people can originate.
I
And
mean, for sure. That's I mean, anyone who can engage with the market at that level is has a tremendously valuable skill,
huh.
I would say.
Yeah, but like any gambling game, there is finding the edge and then there is finding a way to actually make money with that edge, which are two very different skills.
Yep.
Um, so it sounds like a place where good partnerships can come about.
It is, yeah, and there's I mean there are market making sports books that kind of specialize, like Circa, for example, is an example here in Nevada. I think they would consider themselves a market making sports book where they accept all bettors, and they're never gonna, according to, I mean, I can't, promise how that another business that's not me is going to behave in the future, but their kind of value offering is that we will allow anyone to bet within our structure. Even if you're a known winner to us, even if you've won from us, you're welcome to bet with us. Because why are you welcome? Because our view is that we take a sports betting as market making perspective, and we're going to just try to collect the kind of commission, so to speak, for making a market on this stuff. Um, and you know, and therefore, if you have an ability to kind of beat the market prices, um, you can bet it at Circa or bet it at a few other places, and definitely make you know plenty of money. I would say, there is a ton of upside there. I think there's, it's but that is definitely the hardest thing to do. And all there's a reason a very small number of people do this. It's very hard to generate. I mean, they're putting a 4% hold on these markets, right? So you have to overcome quite. I mean, that's a quite significant hold. You basically have to say, I know better than everyone else in the world by not only by a little bit, but by consistently by 4%, basically, right? So,
Right, but if you pick a less mature market, like, like golf is in your example, as
well, that's
opposed
for
to
sure. But
NFL.
you could
Yeah.
bet much less on that also, right? The amount you
Right,
can bet
right.
on it is commensurate with the size of the market directly. So, I mean, it's almost by definition. That is the definition of the size of the market, is how much money is how much liquidity there is in it, and therefore how much you could sell. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, the other thing that I think people will find valuable in this book is you have some ideas about how to not get backed off or limited. And, one of the things that you talk about there is the closing line value, and the fact that you always have closing line value, you're going to get limited very quickly. But
Correct.
isn't that exactly what these top down betters do? I mean, how do they
And
not,
they get
if
limited very quickly.
Oh, okay, so they're just churning account after
Yeah,
account?
that's what they're doing. They're
They
constantly trying to find people with
they
who will
have
let them.
Catholic
Yeah,
families with 9 brothers and
it
sisters
is.
too.
I mean, I can't say I know the details, but I think you have
Yeah,
the
yeah,
right
yeah.
idea. Yes.
So
Yeah.
how do okay, so let's talk about some of these ways to not get limited.
Right. So the basic idea is, so modern sports books, again, I'm drawing a distinction between them and market making ones. Um, and it's not a hard distinction. I want to be clear. This is not a black and white thing, right?
Sure.
These are, two kind of ends of a spectrum. But modern sports book is defined by its interest in offering zillions of betting options. That's how I define it. That one where they want to offer you as many possible things to bet on as possible. That's a modern sports. Well, they, as we go through in the book, it's impossible for them to price all that stuff correctly. It's just, and that's the point where I said I don't think it's incompetence. It's just over promising. They just want to offer more and more and more, and it's just gets to a point where you can't reasonably price it all well, right? So because you can't reasonably price it all well, then if they allowed winning bettors to bet, a winning bettor could just turn $10 into millions, right? Through the power of compounding interest, basically, right? Like exponential curves go up, right? So um yeah, so they basically can't let you do that. Like they are aware that they can't price everything correctly. They are also want to offer all this stuff. They want people to be able, they think it's fun. I think it's fun. I mean, I get it. I get why they want to offer it. So they're like, well, we can't price it all correctly. We want to offer it, and therefore the only option is we basically have to figure out who's trying to beat it and get rid of them. And so that's what they do. So then the question is, well, how do they try to figure out who's beating them? So most people are extremely obvious about it. It's like,
Yeah.
and you're probably familiar with this, like most people who do, like if I walk through a casino in Vegas today, right? There's, you'll see people on I don't know how much you talk about this on your show, but like, there's the slots that you can kind of advantage play, right?
Sure.
And you just, once you know what you're looking for, the people advantage playing the slots are beyond obvious, right?
Yeah.
They don't really try to hide the fact that they're doing it. They'll vulture the things. They'll sit there and leer, or they'll like, or that like I could tell just by looking for 2 seconds that person is advantage playing that slot
Same
versus
thing
this
with a
person.
card counter,
Right,
right? You
exactly.
can see them before they even sit down at the table,
Exactly.
right?
It's
And
just
go,
once
"Oh,
you know
this."
once you're familiar, if you're not familiar with it, you have no idea what's going on. It's like, and then
Yeah.
once you learn a little bit, you're like, oh, I can see it everywhere, right? And it's exactly the same thing at sports betting. Like the people that are trying to win are so obvious most of the time that it's just they could get picked off after a few bets. Like it's just, and we talk about a little bit, but like I mean, just some of the most obvious behavior is people will bet the home runs after they happen. I mean, this is from my experience as a provider of in-play betting. There's the guy that just sits there at the baseball game and jams in the bet the moment the ball comes off the bat, and then 2 seconds later we get the information that there was a home run and he got his bet in. Well, congratulations. I think I know what you're doing. You know what I mean? Like it's just beyond obvious, right? And
Yeah.
and I mean, right. So and yeah, just a lot of the ways people try to win are just are just not subtle.
Yeah.
And so, it's just easy to pick those people off. So what we talk about in the book is, well, how can you do it in a way that's now CLV, which is closing line value, is kind of a mathematical tell that you're winning. So CLV means, like, if you bet a pregame market, let's say you bet let's say you bet a football game on Monday, right? Like the beginning of the week, right? And then by Sunday, by the end of the week, if you made a good bet, what will happen is the market will move in your favor. That's almost the definition of you making a good bet on Monday, is that by Sunday, the market agrees with your bet and the line has moved. And the amount of the line move is measurable. It's just math. You can, so a sports book can say, hey, if you made a bet on Monday, and what was our line on Monday that you bet, and what was the line on Sunday when the game went off, and the difference between the two is an estimate of how good your bet was, right? Well, sports books can run scripts on their customers. They can just run a script that says, how good are all the bets they make on Monday. And if they're good, guess what? They don't want you. So that's the problem with closing line value. So how do you avoid closing line value? Well, there's a lot of bets you can make on these venues that essentially don't have closing line value. In play bets, for instance, there's no such thing as closing line value, right? They put the lines changes between every play because the fundamental problem changes between every play. Every time there's a play, there's new information and the problem changes. And therefore, you can't compare, oh, he got, minus 130 here and then they got sacked and now it went to play. I mean, it's like, that's not a thing, right? Like that's, so there's no easy way to calculate the closing line value in the same way, say, for an in-play bet, for a single game parlay, for a lot of this stuff. Anything where there's not a market, really, there's not really a concept of closing line value. So, so yeah, like it if your idea is I'm going to win at a modern sports book by, betting overnights or betting early and then letting the market confirm that I made a good bet, well, you're being obvious.
So in blackjack, people often have this idea of going into the casino and just playing for an hour or two with no edge to just show them, like, look at me, I'm not a card counter.
Right.
So does this apply in sports books? Can you go in and, bet a bunch of parlays and bet like a donk? Hopefully you can find bets that are not too bad in terms of how much money you're giving away. Will this buy you much time, or as soon as you start pounding them, they're gonna?
So we talk about this in the book. In my experience, the most optimal strategy for longevity, and this is true in all sports. So the problem with sports betting is it's not just the books you're trying to hide the fact that you're winning from. Or rather, what happens is, let's rewind back in time, and let's say it's 20 years ago, right? And where all these modern sports books didn't really exist, and it was kind of all the betting market, and the markets were all smaller. Let's say you found an angle. You found something that was not in the betting. No one else in the betting market had figured out yet. And this was and is definitely a thing you can do. You say they're not accounting for wind in football game. I mean, that's not a thing. But like at some point, I'm sure it was a thing. At some point, it hadn't occurred to anyone that the wind matters, right? So you're the only person in the world that's figured out that the wind matters. And this comes up in one game in 10, right? 9 games out of 10, the wind is not enough to matter, but one game in 10, it matters. And so you want to bet that one game in 10 to get your edge. Well, the problem is, so you bet your one game in 10. Well, there's another person on this taking your bets. There's literally a human being on the other side who's seeing your bet come in. And the moment anyone starts to think you're winning, what they do is they say, how? What's your angle? Right? And they try to figure it out, many times selfishly, because they want to go bet it themselves. Right? So this naturally happens. This happens all throughout the whole sports betting ecosystem, is that the people taking the bets try to figure out what the winning bettors are doing. This is constant. We kind of describe this in the book. And so you have to disguise what you're doing from them. Because the moment they figure it out, then they're going to start betting it and they're not going to be cautious about it. And then it's going to get bet everywhere. And then everyone will figure it out and your edge will be gone. So you have to, so it's kind of, if you want longevity, even if you don't get kicked out, if you just want your angle to persist, you have to basically bet in a way that nobody can figure out what the heck you're doing. And yes, what you just said is I think the strongest way to do that is to create a lot of betting noise around what you're doing. If you only bet one game in 10, they could say, well, what's the common thread? If you bet every game and 1 in 10 of the bets is really good and the other 9 is roughly break even, I mean, it becomes much, much harder to figure out what the heck you're doing. And you're
Yeah.
still winning at the same pace if you do that. Like if you now that, but I've said a mouthful because now you have to find bets on every game that are break even when you're betting
Well,
into a
but
hold.
you in the first book talked about the idea of a synthetic hold,
Yep.
and it seems to me pretty easy to find basically break even bets
Right.
just by line shopping.
I think it's
Now, you may
I
not
think it's
always
easy to
get them at the book you want it at is the problem,
right.
right?
Right.
But yeah,
But
it's
for sure,
definitely
yeah,
doable.
and that is kind of the method that's certainly where you start, right? You start by line shopping, trying to find, okay, my hold's not 4% now, my hold's now 1.5%. I've gotten it between these two, books that'll take my action. I've got we call it synthetic hold in the logic of sport. I don't love that term, but that's what I went with. Um, you know, okay, so now the hold is 1.5%. Well, 1.5 is still too much. If you bet a lot of 1.5, you're gonna lose, right? It's craps is 1.5% or whatever, right?
Yeah,
You're gonna
yeah.
lose if you keep betting 1.5%. So you got to get it down further. So you really do have to have an angle, or you have to have some ability to kind of gain an edge even into the line shops lines. But that's very doable. I mean, it is doable. And if you can consistently do that, to me, that's the most valuable sports betting because once you can lay the cover like that, once you can and the people in practice that I know who have a few examples. This is a common thread that they spam bet, um, and
Now
you
there's a
know
great term, spam bet.
yes, yes. So this is definitely like the idea. Oh, I'm picking and choosing. I'm only betting one game at 10. This is not how the most successful people. Most successful people bet everything, and that's hard because you have to bet everything, not lose on most of it, right? So yeah, so
Well,
that's
and
yeah,
most people are nits and do
right,
not want to give up anything and hate
exactly,
variance, right? But
exactly,
in other thing, like in the casino, variance is your friend. You
yes,
know, if you're willing to take big swings, they're not used to uh, advantage players who do that.
right. Yeah, exactly. So I mean, exactly. All the same ideas apply here, all of them. And your example of I'm going to go in and play like a loser for an hour and then I'm going to play like a winner. Well, that doesn't work. I mean, I assume that doesn't work very well usually, and that wouldn't work here either. Like if you open an account and you play 2 weeks of parlays, money line parlays on random teams, and then you go bet your angle for the next 6 months. I mean, you're not impressing anybody. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
you're not fooling
No,
anybody at all.
it
Yeah.
seems like your cover has to be in the same uh in the same sport and the same kind of bet that your edge bets are going to be.
Yep. You're hiding the signal within the noise is what you're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that will work. I mean, that's extreme. I mean, think about how hard that is to detect. How is anybody going to figure out what the heck you're doing? At the end of the day, these companies, I mean, you're familiar with how they work. At the end of the day, if they have a big red number next to your name, at some point they're just going to say, to hell with
Yeah, no,
you know,
exactly.
and that
In
could
the
happen at any
casino,
moment. I mean, you catch someone on a bad day and they could just say, I'm done with this guy, and then you're done. I mean,
yeah.
they can do that, and that's human nature, and that's how. But yeah, like my experience is that my experience also is, a lot of people are curious. Like if they can't figure out what you're doing, want to figure it out too. Like I've definitely heard this from people in the industry of people who I know have basically used this strategy, like specific people talking about other specific people, where they're like, I know he wins, but I can't figure out how, and so I just let him keep betting. Like I've literally heard that from people, and yeah, so.
Yeah, casinos are less likely to do that.
I think so
Much
too. Yeah. I
much to
think
their detriment.
right,
I think if they did just take some time to watch, they would figure some stuff out.
right. Well, my
Uh,
take and our whole point for kind of why we started the business was I think that their entire product will improve if they harden the menu, right? Like a lot of these bets are extremely beatable. It's like I was saying, with the slots. I mean, the beatable slots are everywhere now. The people beating them are everywhere now. I mean, and I'm not saying the beatable slots are bad for the casino because they need, obviously they win overall for the casino, but like the beatable bets are everywhere on a sportsbook menu. This is not subtle. Like there's zillions of options at any given point. A number of them are mispriced. It's it's and my point is like instead of like the product is just so much better if you just tighten that up as best as you can. Like especially on the bigger stuff like in-play football. I mean, why aren't you trying to do the absolute very best you can to price your in-play NFL line? Like to me, that's obvious. Like this is a core offering of the sports book. Like, why aren't you heavily investing in? To me, if you heavily invest in, the pricing of core offerings like that, like you can just offer much more. You can offer larger limits. You can offer no delays. You can offer, you know, I mean, you end up like there's this thing called the palpable error. Do you know about this? I mentioned it in the book. I don't know if you're how familiar
yeah,
you are.
yeah, 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 yeah. But go
So
ahead and explain it for
so
the.
so so the way this works is so there's kind of the sports book industry has this thing where they can after a bet is made and settled, they can say just kidding and then basically undo the bet or give you revise the odds they offered it. So a concrete example is let's say you bet an in play. I saw somebody on Twitter like 3 days ago. They bet an in play hockey game under 8.5 minus 130 or whatever, right? And then after the game was over and the game went under 8.5, they got an email from the sportsbook saying, "Oops, under 8.5 minus 130 was a palpable error and the actual odds should have been minus 425, so we paid you minus 425." So instead of saying, okay, you bet $100, we're going to pay you, 80 whatever, for minus 130, we're going to pay you 20 on your winning bet, right? Like that's what they said, and then they just do that. They pay you. They say we're going to pay you 20 instead of 80 on this bet instead, right? That you placed. I mean, when you were making the, I mean, right.
Yeah,
So and they can essentially do this arbitrarily, right? They essentially can, on any bet you make, they can send you an email saying, sorry, just kidding, the odds were actually this, and pay you. Now, I understand why they have that practice because, again, as somebody who's tried to make these odds on absolutely everything, yes, you do screw up sometimes. Yes, people do take advantage of it, and sometimes the errors are, I mean, math can get bad, right? I mean, right. So sometimes the errors, but I think some of these sports books way overused. It's a terrible customer experience. Terrible customer experience, right? Just
yeah,
brutally. Like Amazon did this. So Amazon palpable errored me like twice. They basically, I bought something on Amazon, and then they send me an email later saying, sorry, the price was wrong. It's actually like I bought something for $99, right? Let's say. I think this is actually what happened. Is I tried to buy something for $99, and then like 2 days later, I get an email from Amazon, and it says, "Sorry, that price was in error. It's actually $199. Like we've signed you up to buy it for $199 and you could cancel it here," or something like that. They said it, and I was like, well, screw you.
yeah,
And they did that to me twice. And I was like, Amazon's going downhill. That was my thought process. And literally in that moment, I was like, man, if Amazon had an actual real competitor, I would be trying them now. Like
yeah, yeah.
I would I would be like, all right, this is obnoxious. I'm gonna go try Amazon's competitor. Well, obviously they don't have a competitor, so I just kind of sucked it up. But there, in
The
sports books, absolutely have competitors, right? So
Yeah,
yeah,
and I
yeah,
think somebody is actually suing MGM over
yeah.
this issue.
I mean, to me, it's a cus. I mean, I try not to
I
say
agree.
who's
It's a
right, who's
customer
wrong.
service. Yeah,
As someone who's tried to make I understand why they have the rules. I think it should be. I think there should be kind of more restrictions on how it's used. I think it should really be used in extremes. We've accidentally had games up on the software that were already over, and then people bet it, and it's like, come on, that game ended 3 hours ago, and it's obviously software, and it is, and I'm sorry it's on there. We screwed up, or some bug in the software put it up. I mean, it happens, right? Like
yeah,
it definitely happens. I'm sympathetic to that. Like, and people definitely like, obviously, I mean, if you put something like that, everyone's gonna be like,
oh,
What's
yeah,
amazing to me is they like. Well, anyway, it's just funny how people behave, right? But,
yeah.
but like, so I get why the rule exists. I think it's reasonable to say, okay, there should be some kind of rule like that. But I think it's way overused, and it's just such a terrible customer experience to be sending
Yeah.
people emails like that. I mean, it's just like, fix your
Especially,
stuff, man, fix it.
yeah,
Like,
well, and especially when if it happens the in reverse, you're screwed, right? If
oh
you
yeah,
fat
yeah, yeah,
finger, you meant to bet
yeah.
$50 and you put in 500,
Oh
well,
yeah,
you're screwed.
yeah. You're done. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yep, yep. No, I agree. I mean, it's definitely not fair. As a fairness in betting kind of thing goes, is it an acceptable practice given the circumstances? Sort of,
Well,
in
in
some
some
cases,
cases maybe,
some
but not.
cases maybe, but I think it's way overused, and for sure it's a terrible customer experience. So I'm like, well, why don't they put more effort into trying to absolutely minimize that as much? I think it's too casual. Like in my experience in the industry, when you talk to industry people, they're too casual about limiting people and too casual about palpable errors. They're they very much say, you know, I like this was my say because this was my sales pitch. I was like, we try to be as absolutely accurate as possible. We make our lines, and basically the pushback is, well, we just limit anyone who beats us, or well, if we make an error, we just palpable error it,
Yeah.
and I'm like, and I'm like, don't you see how that's bad for your business though? That practice, like, don't you want to not do that stuff?
Yeah.
And they don't. Like, it's just their thinking. They're too ingrained into that's the way it works that kind of I think a lot of people don't see past.
How do you see the future of account limiting? Do you think that'll just continue as is, get better, get worse?
I mean, I think everything gets better over time, right? Like I'm an optimist. I definitely entered the business thinking it would. I entered the business, definitely thinking that 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 people would hear my sales pitch and be like absolutely you're right, Ed. Obviously, let's make our product. It's not quite how people think. So, but at the same time, I did I and obviously we have customers. I mean, people. There's definitely sports books out there that want to offer accurate lines. There's definitely. I mean, I'm overstating it, but I think the truth is somewhere in the middle. I think over time, yes, like there will be an emphasis on quality. I already see that with some of the big sports books. They are trying to make their lines and pricing better. They like the some of the very biggest ones, if you read what they say in the investor calls and stuff, like they say, we're trying to make all our stuff higher quality than everyone else, like better pricing, better, fewer errors. Like they say this in the calls, and these are also the people that are winning. So, and I always put on Twitter, I'm like, the people who are winning are telling you what they think is important. Industry, like pay attention, and everyone else is like, blah, 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 I don't know. So, so, I mean, it would be one thing if like the little, upstart startup, guy with more arrogance than, whatever, if he's telling you how to do your business. I mean, I get it. You ignore him, right? But like,
Right.
I mean, this is your behemoth competitor who in the investor calls is saying, hey, we're investing in quality and trying to make quality pricing, and because we see it as an investment in the future and the growth of the business. And I think it's a competitive advantage for them. So yeah, I think over time, I think we will move in that direction, but I think the movement will be slow. I don't think we're about to see, in 6.
So 5 years down the road, do you expect things to be better for the better than they are now, or the same?
I do. Well, certainly in the U.S. And the point we make in the book is a lot of all this product, as they call it, is new. I mean, it had to be rushed out, really. I mean, the Supreme Court said, all right, no more ban on sports betting.
Yeah.
And then it was just basically like 49, the Oklahoma Sooners or whatever running into the state trying to stake out their claims, right? That was literally the kind of analogy. And I mean that's how stuff came out, like where they're like, well, we don't have anything for college football, and college football starts in 3 weeks. What do we do? And they said, well, we got NFL, just try that. Like that's the mindset. So obviously over time, like that, things mature, and someone actually builds a college football specific model, and
Well, I don't know if that makes
yeah.
it better for the better, though, right? I mean, it's
Well, it
probably better
makes
for
it
the.
it well, here there's less low hanging fruit, but these problems are intractable. I mean, it's impossible to price 17,000 different props on every single college football game and do it all correct. I mean, it's
Yeah.
physically impossible. So there's always going to be a space for somebody who's an enormous college football nerd and just wants to go through the college football menu with a fine-tooth comb and find all the good bets. There's always going to be good bets. It's just impossible for the sports book to price to price all that stuff correctly. So I think it'll always be good for the better. I don't necessarily think it's better for. I mean, if there's 5,000 good bets on a menu, or 60, I'm not sure that matters for the better. Like, 60 is enough
Yeah,
good
yeah.
bets, kind of, right? Does
If
that
you
make
could
sense?
find
Like,
them in all that.
and it's honestly, it's better for the better if the sports book is a little overconfident. Like if it's harder to beat them, and because they know it's harder they know how easy it is to beat this stuff, right? So
Yeah.
because they know how easy it is to beat it, they're careful. They're kicking people out. They're like, stop
Yeah.
beating our stuff, you know. And the more mature it gets, the more confidence they're going to have in the quality of it, and the more tolerance I think they're going to show for people who can beat it intelligently. Just that's, to me, that's also human nature. So that's I guess the optimistic view of how this could evolve, and I definitely think it could evolve that way.
So I wanted to ask you about you did an interview with Gina for Unabated, and in
Hmm.
it you said that you didn't believe in back testing your NFL model.
Right.
And a number of people sort of were asking, like, say what?
Right.
Why do you not want to back to? I guess we're getting a little bit in the weeds
No,
here, but
I'm happy to talk about this. This is an
yeah, yeah,
interesting topic. So the concept of backtesting is you're saying, okay, I'm going to build a model, and then I'm going to look to see if it would have won in the past, right? That's essentially
right,
what you're saying. So to me, there's two problems with it. One is, um, in order to do this properly, you have to hold back data. You basically you have to take games out of your sample that you use to build your model and pretend those are games that, I mean, your model has to not know about anything that happened in those games, really, in order to get an actual test. Well, they just don't play very many games. Like, there's just not much data. The entire problem is there's never enough data. I'm never like, oh, I've got so much football data. Like, they only play, like in college, they play 12 games a year, and then they all graduate. And then new players come in. Like, there's no data. Like, there's
yeah, yeah, yeah.
you're always you always want more data. I mean, this is the core problem with modeling these sports. It's like there's never enough data, and so the idea of, oh yeah, and I'm going to hold back 30% of my data so that I can back test. It's like, no. So that's my first point about back testing. Like, the second point is the stuff is always changing. Every year is different. The rules in the sport are different. The market is always changing. Like this, we had a thing in baseball where, you know, we had a we basically were accounting for something in the totals that we were sure the market wasn't accounting. And then the very next year, as it turns out, baseball decided to Major League Baseball started messing with the actual baseballs. Um, and this is an ongoing problem if you follow baseball. That the league is, and they don't tell anybody. And and
Oh,
and
it
and,
wasn't
and I don't want to
public?
say it's a conspiracy. Because it's not. I don't even think it's there's some oh they're juicing the balls. I don't know. I don't think it's that. I think it's just it just happens, right? Like that. But the actual manufacture of the ball matters a lot. Okay, and then like a lot, like how tightly the threads are wound inside the ball matters for how many home runs they hit by a lot, and also the humidifiers, like how they store the balls matters
Wow.
a lot. Like that's how they addressed the Colorado's Rockies stadium when they built it. So they originally built the Rockies stadium with very far out outfield walls because it's high altitude and they know the ball will carry out. So they tried to compensate for that by building a large outfield. Well, the ball's got there was enormous amounts of offense, like enormous amounts of offense in Colorado anyway, even though the home run rate and it had to do with the fact that Colorado is also very dry. And so they tried to remedy the over offensing there by storing the balls in a humidor. And that brought the offense down substantially overnight, right? So I'm I don't want to get into specifics, but basically we had stuff that would have beaten the totals going back to Kingdom Come, and it was immediately no good because they changed it. They just
Yeah.
changed the balls, and then it was not a thing anymore. And so it's like, and that happens all the time. So it's like everything's constantly changing. The market's changing, and it's just like and you're going to hold data. I just don't see the point. Like it's like
Yeah, yeah.
you think you have an edge, you bet it, you look at how your bets are doing, you look at how the market thinks, especially if you're betting into a market, you look at what the market thinks of your bets. You I mean you just have to figure out on the fly whether you're betting with an edge or not, in my opinion.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't think it's useful to look back.
So you're no longer with Deck Prism, which is now a Huddle. So are you
Correct.
back to betting sports?
Well, I wrote a book.
Well,
That was my
yeah,
first
but
project. My first project was to write a book. Because I just kind of had stuff I wanted to say, right? It's just I don't know.
yeah,
Like this
sure.
book is stuff Ed wanted to say. Is what this book is, more or less, and Matt and my co-author Matt,
Yeah.
but that's kind of what the book was. And then yeah, I don't know. I don't have a plan now. I'm looking at, maybe doing some new modeling or looking, kind of doing new stuff along the lines of what I've been doing, or I don't know, maybe I'll go teach high school physics, which was my original plan before I uh, decided to become a git, but probably not. I'll probably do something.
Yeah, yeah.
It's sort of CBD. I don't have a hard plan at the
I would
moment.
think it'd be hard to resist just opening those apps and saying, just free money laying around here. I might as well
I
pick
mean,
some of it up.
maybe I'll do some of that.
Although Vegas seems to be one of the worst places to be a sports bettor.
Right. Well, yeah, that has to do with the regulatory environment here in Nevada. The regulatory environment is I would it to use a nice term, I would call it stringent. Um, you know, it makes it hard to bring new things to the
Yeah.
new technology, yeah, to this state in particular.
So something I ask all my guests on this show is, what is the biggest gamble in your life?
Right. Okay. So I would say I adopted my son from foster care. So I would definitely say that kind of getting involved in the foster care system, and this is kind of with I didn't look at it this way from at the time, at the time I was like, I don't know, uh, I don't know what I was thinking, but in retrospect, you know, I look back on that and I say, wow, that was a huge kind of personal risk I took to get involved with the system and to kind of because once you get involved, it's like it can go a million different directions, and it does not have to go. I mean, my son's great. We did end up adopting him. His birth family's great. His you know everything's positive. Kind of more or less with the outcome, and we had I would say a happy ending very much with my involvement with the system, but it was definitely a bit hairy at the time as we were actively dealing with the foster care system. And then I heard so many just horrible, just all sorts of things could go wrong. And so, kind of in retrospect, I would say that was the biggest gamble I took in life was to decide to become a foster parent and to decide to and some people who become foster parents, I think they look at it differently than I did. And maybe in that case, it isn't as big a gamble. Like you're just kind of saying, well, my job is to just literally just provide a home, and I'm gonna kind of not invest emotionally in it, not invest financially in it as much, not invest like I'm gonna kind of go by the letter of okay, well, the child needs a home, they can stay in my bedroom, they need to go to school, I'll take them to school, they need to the system says they need to go somewhere else, I'll just take them to the other place they need to go, and then I'll get a new kid in the bedroom. And I think some people interact with foster care, and maybe in that case it's a little bit less of a gamble, but kind of we went into it, and I was just like, I'm gonna behave like I'm this child's parent, and I'm gonna advocate, on his behalf as if, I were his biological parent. I'm gonna do, and in that way, it's really you're taking on I think a big risk in doing that because,
Yeah.
they just that could go all kinds of different directions.
Yeah, my
Yeah,
wife and I got into the foster care system in California, where I think it may be even more.
yeah,
Uh,
wouldn't be surprised.
yeah, so yeah, big risk, and I'm glad that it worked out well. So,
Yeah, so yeah. So I think that's in retrospect is the biggest risk I've taken in life.
all right. Well, I want to thank you for doing this. This was great, and just for the listeners, you can always reach me at lifeisagamblepod@gmail.com, or I'm on Twitter at rwm21.